welcome to Inside Events, a new international contemporary podcast focused on the key issues in events and festivals. This week, I'm joined by Dr. Martin Schnitzer from the University of Innsbruck, and we're going to be talking about resident support for major events. Welcome, Martin. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, the organization you work for, and why are you particularly interested in the ideas around resident support for major events?
Events is really something what I like, but I learned that there are many who are not thinking that it's great having events. So residents who were opposing events, who were saying no to Olympics, and I said, okay, we have to go a bit in more detail and to understand the support of or the non-support of staging events, and that's why I'm investigating and doing research in that field.
Thanks, Martin. And when it comes to why people should care about this topic, obviously you're in the context of Innsbruck. We're going to go for the Winter Olympics, but there was some kind of local resident non-support for that. Could you tell us maybe just a little bit about that local context, because it's so interesting?
Well, we were successfully staging twice the Winter Olympic Games here in Innsbruck, and we are hosting many events in Innsbruck and in the region, which is called Tyrol, which is quite a popular touristic region. So we have over 50 million overnight stays per year. So it's really huge tourism demand of skiing and alpine sports and so on. And it's interesting to see and to learn that we had 3 negative referendums in the last 3 decades. And to understand, we have a long history on sports and then events. Why do people not want to stage these events, and what are the concerns they have? And it's important in a political decision-making process, because we are investing a lot of monies, building infrastructure, venues. We use taxpayers' money. And discussing about this issue of events, costs and benefits of events, that is a crucial point to understand also the residents as crucial stakeholders, and to understand what is the benefit for the single resident, and what is potentially the disadvantages. Is it only during the event because it's noisy, it's maybe traffic jams and stuff like that, or has it also long-term negative impacts? And that's why to get more in detail, more to analyze what's going on in the heads of the residents, it's very crucial. And I live myself in Innsbruck with my family, and we discuss with friends also, is it worth organizing an event? And that's why I was really interesting since years now. I'm researching it.
Thanks, Martin. And so what were the reasons why they didn't want to support it? What were, if you could kind of boil it down to a kind of a few core ones that people were working in local government or municipalities and they were thinking, we need to solve these in order to push forward for future bids, what would those be, Martin?
Well, we have identified a few factors which are crucial for residents. So it's, in one thing, there are security issues. So people are afraid of having an international event, and the security with high cost related, and maybe having some fears. It's also a question about investments. Are investments in sports infrastructure good, or building huge Olympic sites? So it's also a question about, is the money well invested for big investments, large investments? Then it's also related to cost overruns, which is people say, they say the bidding, it doesn't cost that much, but at the end it costs much more, and that is And at the end, we also find there's some really intangible factors like trust. So people say, okay, we don't like IOC, we don't like the FIFA, they're just taking money and they are not really interested in sports. So having also this doubtful, situations we had in the last years where some other hosts, had the pleasure of organizing the events. We see it with Qatar, we see it with Rio, we see it with Sochi. So people are discussing in our areas and they say, okay, this is not a fair deal. And that's why they are opposing. They start opposing and they're saying, well, it's better not having these events. And personally, this is not what we have investigated yet. And we have not proven the data on that. But it's also a question about, well, we are a wealthy nation. We are staying well. We have a lot of tourists. We don't need it. So I was also inventing this word of over eventism. So is it not having too much events? And then people say, well, we don't need that. And then they are starting opposing, especially mega events, because smaller events, they say, okay, even though they are not running that well, they say, okay, damage is not that big. But with Olympics, they're still saying, oh, I don't know.
No, that's really useful. And you see this all the time. Like in our context in Orlando, we don't need major events at all to put bums in beds and to provide that economic boost, because it's seen as those sports events, they come in, they don't fully engage with the destination, they take, and they just don't give enough back. And the idea is that here they're talking about the idea of events as being transactional relationships with their destinations and not really transformational at all. And so in some sense, Martin, do you think that that it is the organizers and the government's responsibility who are bidding for these things to quite clearly articulate what they're doing? And do you think that it's an issue of they didn't articulate the benefits well enough for local people, or not?
Well, you're touching really an important point. It's to highlight the benefit, but it's also to be open and to be clear in the communication. What are also potential risks and what are also the negative impacts? So just telling that everything is good and everything is great, people are not they're not stupid. They are saying, well, we don't believe, and we have seen, and there are existing also studies which are not only saying that everything is good. So it's very important from a policy perspective, and also for well, having really an open discussion with the residents, telling them what are the good points, what are the potential risks, to say, okay, how can we tackle that situation where we have potential high costs, or to say, well, we don't know exactly how certain things will run out, because, well, there's very often also quite a big portion of luck. It could be weather, it could be success of national athletes, it could even create a hype, like we have seen in other circumstances. I remember the FIFA World Cup in Germany in 2006 was really changing also the image and the reputation of Germany as a nation. So I think things like that should also be considered. And I think what in the last situations we have seen here was that people said, okay, there's a hidden agenda, we don't know, there's a lack of trust, and I think that is something where you need to see this event as a long-term process, and you say, okay, we are building on a story which is a long-lasting story, which is a great story of our destination, and that is fitting perfectly to this story, and to explain then to people why this makes sense, or why is it worth bidding for that event. And well, in the past, we also have seen that bidding attempts had been also unsuccessful by spending a lot of money for doing just the bid, and then at the end someone else took it. So you were basically here and you lost, and then, well, you were here with empty hands, and it was also the approach of, well, how can we also win even if we lose the bid? How many bids we need to have in order to to build up on the experiences and to take then at the right moment the opportunity to take the event and to integrate that event in the long-term strategy of the destination of the host city. I think this is the residents need to understand the story behind. I think that is a crucial point.
That's a really good point. And yeah, it goes back, and I've said this on a few podcasts now, but it goes back to a podcast that I did with Vasilios Zayakis, who is really strong on kind of event portfolios. He's written a lot about event portfolios, and now every single event needs to be clearly explained to the public in terms of what it's doing to shift the dial for some sort of social or economic indicator. You've got the mini ones, you've got the middle ones, you've got the big ones, and then you've got the big ones. And they all need to kind of somehow be stitched together in this portfolio approach to explain. And we don't do that really very well, I suspect. Is that the case in Innsbruck as well? Do they think on those kind of strategic lines? Are they good at that, or do they need to do a bit better?
I have done some research on that as well, and we learned that there had never been a written strategy. That being also always quite a good understanding how you can successfully bid and stage the event, but there was never a really clear strategy behind. And I give you an example. We had in the arch of 6 months in 2018-19 the climbing world championship, which is now very popular. It is also part of the Olympics, so climbing, rock climbing. We had the cycling world championships, which now took place in Scotland, so it's also a huge event. And a few months later, the Nordic ski world championships. This happened only in the arch of a few months. And people said, okay, this is not a strategic approach to have so many events in such a short amount of time. And it was not that they were strategically embedded and they were not benefiting from each other. So, for example, if you were volunteering for one event, you were volunteering for the next event. You were not using the same infrastructure. So you saw on this case that it was completely by coincidence these three events took place in such a short amount of time. And I think that is the point where we are lacking. Now, we have also learned, not only from practice, but also from research, that such a portfolio approach, by hosting, we have in the region of Tiro 250 sports events every year. So 5 events every week. Of course, there are minor and community events as well integrated. But you see, you need to have a clear balance where you take place these events, who is going to organize that, how can you develop this story. And currently, we are working together with the local government on a not sport event strategy, but developing a clear portfolio, because this is also what, to come back to the residents, they do not understand. And if you don't tell them the story behind, then they are not agreeing, then they are opposing, and then they're saying, okay, it's just a waste of money.
That's a great point. Really interesting. To be great to do maybe another podcast in the future to learn maybe a little bit more about that specific thing that you're doing with the local government on the portfolios. Because at every small event, people have criticized these large scale events for not kind of developing the sort of social cohesion that they pretend that they're going to do. But it's actually the smaller grassroots type festivals and events that actually bring people together in a sense of community. And it's about knowing what each event is, what its limits, and what is it going to do. The smaller ones are not going to develop Tyrol or Innsbruck's international prestige and maybe bring people, target tourists from Japan to come over, but they will do different things. So it's about, again, it's a complex picture, isn't it? In terms of the future, Martin, in terms of resident support for major events generally, we've seen that people are vetoing these things. They're cancelling left, right, and centre. We saw the Victoria Commonwealth Games. Wasn't a referendum, but it was because of a lot of protest and pressure from local community groups that were saying that they were spending too much money. We're seeing that this trend is just intensifying, that there's more and more people pushing back. Is that the future trend to this? Is there anything else that we need to be perhaps aware of?
Well, I personally see and I think that we have come to a certain peak of and we have started having another learning curve. I personally see, and we can start with the IOC. I think developing the Agenda 2020 in 2014 had been a really important step for the whole industry, because to say, okay, it's not about bigger, bigger, bigger. It's about being smarter. It's about being more aware what is really needed from the host city and then from the host community. It's a little bit of well, being more careful, and the politicians, they are fearing referendums because they say, okay, if I lose a referenda, it's a personal loss, and I probably will not be re-elected. That's why they say, okay, I don't run this risk, and that's why there's more consciousness, there's more reflecting, there's more strategy. I think that is something which is coming slowly, and we have to have some good examples, some best practices where people can see, okay, that's why I personally think Innsbruck could be a good example for how you can organize, let's say, Winter Olympic Games with a low budget, with a good way of integrating residents. Well, it's not my job; it's a politician's job. But I think we need to have some good examples in order to show that is more easygoing, smaller, thinking about how we can also have a nice event without having just fireworks everywhere. In also in another sense, not just in a visual sense. I think that could be a long term shift, and I think also, especially Western countries, well, they are of course in a certain competition, and they say, okay, well, we cannot go in a long term only having events, mega events in Asia and in other places in the world. So they need to come back, and I think Paris could be a good example for the next Olympics. Well, we will learn about that, but it's about how can we develop this story. I'm coming back to that fact and say, okay, smaller is more beautiful, and then I think the credibility comes back, and to basically to say, as a host destinations, well, we are ready to do a deal with the event owner and with the whole community. That's how far we want to go. And if you want more, we are not the right one. So it's like in a partnership. If you are then starting to change yourself too much, where you don't feel comfortable, then better to step back. And I think that could be also a new shift, a new idea in the future. Maybe it's just wishful thinking, but that's why we do research to show good and bad examples where we can learn from. Maybe that is, I think, a learning curve in general. We have, in my opinion, also seen the last years, and it takes decades probably.
I agree. Yeah, I think when you see the ISC 2020, then the 2020 plus 5, and then you see them writing things around embedding the UN Sustainable Development Goals and really thinking about how these are operationalized. Then you have the rights and social responsibilities angle, making sure that people are included, disabled people are included, various other marginal groups. There seems to be a lot going on to try and make these things more equitable, more kind of acceptable, I guess, in some sense. Because people are really questioning the diversion of public money, aren't they? A lot more, it seems, that oh no, I can clearly see that money from health and education is moving into this speculative event pot for physical metal venues. And people are kind of taking an active role in the development of their place, I think, more than ever, what seems to be the case. But it's definitely a positive step. forward. Martin, I'll drop you a line afterwards, and I'll see what other kind of resources that we can put underneath the podcast. So if anyone's really interested in knowing a little bit more about that, including the paper that you wrote in Annals of Tourism Research on over-tourism, and how that played a fact in some of the reticence, and we'll have that underneath. But hopefully in the future we can have another chat about some of the work that you're really doing locally with the government to articulate the story, I guess, of the event portfolio. Would you be up for that?
I'm ready, and I'm looking forward, because I think that's why now it's a step, but now we have to learn again for new cases and of new studies we are currently conducting, and I think there's still a lot to do, and I think also I think we need to work on the credibility of events, that they are not just pushed in an angle and say, okay, what you're telling is you're doing great events, but the most things you're doing is not true. And I think we have to shift that a little bit in the right direction.
I agree. Thanks, Martin. And thanks for coming on Inside Events. Hopefully we'll have you in the future.
Well, looking forward, and all the best to all of you.
Thanks, Martin. Martin, if you could just stay on the